I was already inside the terminal when my fingers found an empty pocket. Passport. Not there. I stopped in a river of rolling suitcases. A gate agent announced final boarding for Portland. My sister was waiting. I should have kept walking. Instead, I turned around and walked out into the cold air with my heart knocking like a door in a storm. 10 minutes, I told myself. In and out. The rideshare crawled through traffic while I pressed my palm flat over my chest to quiet the tremble. Home rose at the end of the street like a memory I could not outrun. Porch light off. Shades half closed. My keys sat in my hand. I did not drop them in the blue bowl by the door the way I always did. I held my breath and listened. There were voices. Low. Careful. My son. Cedric. And Monique. Their words floated down the hall like a draft under a door. If she is showing signs, we can move ahead with guardianship. The word stung. Guardianship. Another voice answered. Admissions. Capacity. Thursday. The syllables clicked against my ribs like ice in a glass. I took one step into the hallway. The house smelled like his cologne and something floral I did not know. I could hear the soft scrape of a folder opening. The hush of paper. A pen tapping. Cedric said she will not even notice. We will make it smooth. I saw my reflection in the foyer mirror. A woman who had given him college without loans. Night shifts. Sundays spent making a life out of coupons and hope. I touched the spot where my wedding ring used to rest when Walter was still here to warm the winters. I should have walked in and said his name. I should have asked why my own child was planning my disappearance while standing on my rug. Instead, I stepped back until my shoulders kissed the wall, and the drywall dusted my sweater. I heard Monique say the facility has music therapy and a garden. It sounded like a commercial. I felt my age settle on me like a coat soaked through. I turned the key without a sound and slipped outside. The sky was hard and bright. I could taste metal. I sat in the car with my hands on the wheel and did not start the engine. I was not supposed to hear it, but I did. And now the woman who left for the airport was gone. The woman who stayed would keep receipts and speak softly and prove every single thing. The day started like 1,000 quiet mornings before it. I had packed my small suitcase the night before, folded my clothes the way Walter liked things to be neat and labeled. My boarding pass sat inside my wallet, my phone charger wound tight in a pouch. Everything under control. That was who I was. When I realized my passport was missing, it felt like nothing more than a small mistake. Forgotten thing. But the truth of my life was hiding behind that missing booklet, and I was about to drive straight into it. The street was empty when I pulled back into the driveway. Afternoon sun spilling through the trees, the house standing still the way old houses do when they are keeping secrets. The door gave a small sigh as it opened. I remember the sound of my shoes against the floor, slow and careful. Then the voices. Cedric first. His tone carried that smooth authority that used to make me proud when he was a boy in debate club. Now it scraped against my nerves. If we move before Friday, he said, the review board will have enough evidence to approve the guardianship. Guardianship. The word pressed against my chest. Monique answered in that sugary tone she saved for strangers and bank tellers. Velma says the doctor only needs a note of observation. She already spoke to someone at Golden Oaks. Everything's ready. Golden Oaks. A place for the forgotten. I stood there behind the archway with my back to the wall, heart stumbling. I wanted to call his name to remind him I was still standing, still thinking, still his mother. Instead, I listened. Every sentence was a shovel burying me deeper. She misplaces things, Monique said. She repeats stories. The neighbors notice. She'll thank us later, Cedric replied. It's safer this way. Safer. When I walked back to the car, I was not angry. Not yet. I felt hollow, as if the echo of their voices had replaced my breath. I sat behind the wheel and looked at the house, at the curtains Walter had chosen, at the porch swing he'd fixed last summer before his heart gave out. I thought about how silence could be louder than a scream. I did not drive to the airport. My hands turned the wheel on their own and guided me through streets I had not seen in years. The bakery, the church, the small bookstore where Walter once bought me a journal with a red ribbon. I stopped in front of Pearl and Nellie's bakery, the same place we used to visit every Sunday after service. Inside, the air was warm and sweet. Cinnamon. Butter. Toasted almonds. The woman behind the counter did not know me, but the smell did. It wrapped around me like memory. I ordered a coffee and sat near the window. Through the glass I watched strangers hurry by with their coats pulled tight. I thought about Cedric as a boy, stacking sugar packets into towers, his questions about how bridges hold so much weight. I remembered his small fingers turning the pages of a book I had borrowed from the library, the one about trains and tunnels. I had believed that curiosity would keep him kind. I had been wrong. The coffee cooled. My reflection in the window was steady, but my chest burned. That moment, sitting in the hum of the bakery, I understood something I had been avoiding for years. Love does not erase greed. I left the cup half full and stepped outside. The sky was the color of tin. I walked without knowing where I was going until I stood in front of the old library. The building looked smaller than I remembered. I still had my key from when I worked there part-time cataloging archives. Inside, the air smelled of ink and oak. Familiar. Safe. I walked through the aisles, fingers grazing the bindings. Every shelf felt like an old friend. I went to the back room, the one labeled Special Collections, and found the drawer where we used to file original wills and estate notes for record. Walter's folder was there, thicker than most. I spread the papers across the table. His handwriting curved along the margins, small arrows, numbers, notes only he and I understood. On the last page he had written, B retains control. No transfer without independent review. My throat tightened. Walter had known this world could turn cold. He had left me protection written in his own hand. There was a sticky note tucked under the clip. If you ever doubt, trust the numbers. I smiled for the first time that day. I copied every page slow and steady like I used to handle rare manuscripts. I placed the copies in a new folder and labeled it with a pencil. Walter Underfingerman's original under for proof. When I left the library, dusk was sliding across the parking lot. The oak trees outside bent with the wind, their branches whispering against the glass. Driving home, I rehearsed what I might say if Cedric called. I didn't plan to pick up, but words help a person breathe. I heard you, I whispered to the steering wheel. And I will not be erased. The house waited in silence. I did not turn on the lights. I sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, pen ready. I wrote a list the way Walter used to write shopping notes. Collect evidence. Secure counsel. Verify mental capacity. Protect assets. The ink bled slightly through the paper. I ran my fingers over the lines until they dried. Then I reached into the top drawer, beneath the cloth napkins, and pulled out the small voice recorder I had used during oral history interviews. It still worked. The tiny red light blinked once before it vanished. I placed it on the table and looked at it for a long time. That light was the only thing that made me feel safe. I thought about Walter's voice, about how calm he always sounded even when the car broke down or the bills piled up. Steady hands win battles, he used to say. That night I made tea and left the cup on the counter. I let the kitchen look untidy, just enough to match the picture they were painting of me. Then I went to bed with the recorder on the nightstand, its red light off, waiting for morning. In the dark, I whispered a prayer I had not said since Walter's funeral. I asked for courage, not vengeance. For clarity, not rage. I wanted to see every shadow clearly before I stepped into it. By the time the sun rose, the plan was already taking shape in my mind. This was no longer about a forgotten passport. This was about a woman who refused to disappear quietly. Morning arrived without music. No radio. No kettle song. Light moved across the ceiling in pale strips. I lay still and watched dust turn in the air like tiny prayers. I thought about the night before and the way a single word can bruise a life. Guardianship. A word made for people who cannot hold a spoon or remember the street they live on. A word they had placed on my name while my coat still hung by the door I paid for. I rose and made the bed tight. Walter always said a straight sheet is a straight mind. In the mirror I saw a woman with soft lines around the mouth and the kind of eyes you get from years of listening to other people. I put on a sweater and pressed my palms down my arms until I felt steady. I took out my notebook and wrote the date. I wrote one sentence. I am not confused. The kitchen was quiet. I placed the small recorder under the napkin holder and covered it with a folded towel. I opened a new page in my notebook and made a second list. Places where I have been careful. I wrote church. I wrote bank. I wrote doctor. I wrote library. I added a fifth line and wrote neighbors because the truth has a way of walking across grass on Sunday afternoon. Before I made breakfast, I closed my eyes and let myself think about Walter. Not the hospital or the silence after. I thought about our first tiny house on the corner where the mailbox shook when trucks passed. He used to come home from the factory with his hands smelling like metal and soap. He would put his head against my shoulder and ask about my day in the stacks. He loved that I knew how to keep track of things. He loved that nothing got lost when I was near. I could feel the warmth of his breath as if it had never left the room. I wrote down the first signs I had ignored. Cedric replacing the family accountant with a firm he called Modern. Cedric changing my online banking password with the excuse that two-factor is complicated for you. Monique bringing brochures for wellness retreats that looked like hotels but spoke in cold words. Capacity, observation, transfer of care. Each memory clicked into place like a jar lid sealing shut. I wanted to be angry. Anger would have been easier. Anger could have taken me to the airport and let me run away to my sister with a story about a misunderstanding. Instead, I felt a sorrow so clean it hurt to breathe. I put my hand on the counter to hold myself steady. The counter was cool and real and did not lie. I stood there until the ache turned into something I could use. I drove to Pearl and Nellie's again and bought 2 sweet rolls I did not need. I sat by the window and let cinnamon and butter lift the edge of the day. I watched a mother tie her child's shoe with one knee on the sidewalk and it made me smile. Love is the quiet work. Love is the small tying that keeps a life from coming loose. People forget that. Power is a louder thing. Power wants applause. Love is not interested in clapping. Back home, I opened the hall closet and pulled down the blue tin box that held receipts and letters. I carried it to the table and sorted the contents into neat stacks. Utility bills, medical copays, insurance notices. I circled dates that matched the months when Cedric started to take over small pieces of my business. I wrote notes in the margins. Who asked for this? Who signed that? What changed and why? Every line steadied me. The more I wrote, the more my breath evened out. Words turned into a railing I could use to walk across a narrow bridge. I called the church office and asked if Miss Joyce was around. She runs the choir and knows every person within 4 blocks. She answered on the second ring and told me to come by the fellowship hall. When I arrived, she was setting out sheet music for the altos. Her hands are quick and sure. Her smile is the kind that makes you tell the truth, even when you had planned to speak around it. We sat at a round table by the window. I asked for her ears and her discretion. She folded her hands and said, "Both are yours." I told her I had overheard Cedric and Monique. I said the words slowly so I could hear how they sounded when they were not banging inside my chest. She listened without blinking. When I finished, she nodded once. She said, "I am sorry." She said, "This is happening more than folks admit." She reminded me that silence can be a shelter, or it can be a trap. Then she asked if I wanted her and Mr. Earl to witness any document signing. She did not say the word capacity. She said the word dignity. I felt the room warm by a few degrees. I left the church with a flyer for Sunday night rehearsal and a promise in my pocket. I walked past the charity rack where donated coats hang for whoever needs them. A soft blue coat brushed my arm and I thought of Monique and the floral scent I did not know. I wondered if that scent had filled my hallway long before my nose learned to recognize it. I wondered how many afternoons they had talked in my living room while I sorted laundry in the back. The thought landed like a stone. At the market I bought tulips. Yellow ones. I brought them home and put them in the green vase Walter found at a yard sale. Yellow means light still finds a way in. I told myself that out loud as I trimmed the stems. Light still finds a way in. I placed the vase near the kitchen window where the sun likes to linger before it leaves. The phone rang. Cedric. I let it go to voicemail. His message was sweet and simple. "Hey Mom. Checking in. Need anything from the store?" He put a smile in the last word the way people do when they want you to feel managed and grateful at the same time. I saved the message and wrote the time down. Later that afternoon I walked to the library again. The back room hummed with old fluorescent lights, that soft flicker I know by heart. I copied the margin notes in Walter's file onto lined paper in my own hand. I used a pencil because pencil forgives errors without leaving scars. On one sticky note Walter had written Beekeep's final signature. It was underlined twice. I ran my thumb over the lines until I felt the paper warm. I remembered the day Walter showed me how to seal a box of records, so that you could tell at a glance if anyone had opened it. He taught Cedric too. We sat on the floor after supper with tape and string and small dots of wax. Cedric laughed when the wax dripped on his jeans. He was 10 years old and honest in a way I could trust. He used to ask me what integrity meant. I told him it was a kind of spine you carry across a lifetime. I told him a person without it bends in all the wrong places. On my way home I drove past Cedric's building and saw Monique on the sidewalk with a clipboard. She was speaking to a woman in light blue scrubs. They parted with a hug that looked practiced. I parked down the block for a moment and watched. I am not a spy. I am a mother who had been forced to use her eyes. I wrote down the time. Back in my kitchen I made tea. Steam rose in thin lines and curled under the light. I wrapped my hands around the cup and let the warmth soak into my fingers. A sound at the door made me set the cup down. Cedric came in without knocking. He had a grocery bag on one arm and that calm smile he puts on like a jacket. "Mom," he said. "I was in the neighborhood. Brought soup." He kissed my cheek and looked around like he was surveying a property. I let my hands tremble a little as I reached for the bowls. I let a spoon clink against the counter. He watched like a man checking a weather report. He asked how I was sleeping. He asked if I had been forgetting the heat again because the house felt cool. I nodded and looked at the floor. I asked him what day it was. He told me and did not hide his satisfaction. He heated the soup and set a bowl in front of me as if he were feeding a guest in his hotel. We ate in near silence. He mentioned a place with a garden and music therapy. He called it a community. He said the word safety. He said words like transition and ease. He used a voice that lived halfway between a lullaby and a sales pitch. I said perhaps. I said that might be nice. I asked him again what day it was. The small recorder under the napkin holder listened harder than any person ever could. After he left I stood by the window and watched him sit in his car. His mouth moved like he was practicing lines. Then he typed on his phone for a long time. I felt a wave rise in my chest. It lifted me and then set me down. I sat at the table and picked up the recorder. I pressed stop. The light blinked. I placed the recorder on a folded dish towel like it was something that could bruise. I played a few seconds back to make sure the sound was clear. His voice filled the room again and my body went cold. I stopped the playback and slid the device into a small zip bag. I wrote a label in careful script. Kitchen visit 1. I added the date and the time. I placed the bag in the blue tin beside Walter's notes. I needed a doctor next. Not because I doubted my mind. Because I wanted a line anyone could read. The kind of line that sits under a signature and says capacity affirmed. I called the office of Dr. Charles Clifton and told the nurse I wanted a checkup and a written summary. She knew me from years of flu shots and blood pressure checks. She gave me a time for the following afternoon. That night I pulled a shoebox from under the bed and found a letter from Walter. It was short. He had written it 10 years ago after a rough patch with Cedric. "Our boy is good at winning," he wrote, "and sometimes he forgets how to be good at loving. If he ever makes you doubt yourself, trust what you know." Then he had drawn a small square and written inside it, "This is your ground. Stand here." I placed the letter on my nightstand and read it twice before I turned off the lamp. Sleep came in pieces. I woke to the sound of rain and the soft creak of the porch swing as wind moved it an inch and then another. For a moment I thought of all the women who have sat up at 2 in the morning with a truth too large to swallow. I spoke aloud to them as if they could hear me. "Sisters, I am with you. We are still standing." In the morning I dressed in a clean blouse and pressed slacks and the blue coat from the church rack, because sometimes strength is borrowed. In the mirror I looked like a woman who could read complicated forms and point to the right line. At the clinic Dr. Clifton asked his gentle questions and then a few more. He checked my reflexes and my eyes. He nodded often. He wrote notes with a steady hand. When he finished he printed a statement that said clearly that in his medical opinion I was cognitively sound and capable of managing my affairs. He had 2 staff members sign as witnesses. He asked if I wanted a notary and I said yes. I left with a folder that felt like a shield. On my way home I stopped at the bank. Officer Sharon has served our family for years. She wears her hair in a neat bun and remembers birthdays. I asked to speak in her small office by the glass wall. I told her I needed to review account access and any recent appointment logs. She pulled up the screen and frowned. She printed a record of attempts to schedule a beneficiary review. She showed me notes that mentioned a request for a co-signer discussion. She tapped the page with her pen and said nothing had been executed. I thanked her and asked for copies stamped with the date. She said of course and offered water. I declined because my hands had started to shake. Outside the bank I sat in the car until my hands calmed. A message arrived on my phone. Monique. Sweet words again. Just checking if you need anything. She added a photo of a sunny courtyard with a raised garden bed and a musician holding a guitar. The caption read Golden Oaks Tuesday concert. I saved the image to a folder I titled Inquiry. I wrote the time in my notebook. At home I opened all the windows to let winter light find me. I laid out the documents on the dining table. Affidavit of capacity, bank logs of attempted changes, copies of Walter's annotated will. I moved around the table the way I used to move around a reference desk on a busy day. I sorted. I labeled. I checked spellings and dates. I added sticky notes that read show this first or ask about this line. The act soothed me. My breath matched the slow pull of the tape as I sealed a new file jacket. I called Jacqueline Ballantyne from the number Walter had saved on a piece of paper in his wallet. She answered on the third ring with a voice that sounded like a good oak table feels. Solid. I told her I needed elder law counsel. I told her I had recordings. I told her I had no wish to punish my child, but I had every wish to protect my life. She set a time for the next morning and told me to bring everything. She did not ask for details over the phone. She said bring your calm and bring your proof. That evening I baked cornbread because measuring flour and sugar makes the world behave. I placed a pat of butter in the cast iron and watched it melt and run to the edges. The house filled with a smell that could make a person believe tomorrow will be kind. I ate a small square with honey and drank a cup of tea. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway to listen to the dark. The house hummed the way old houses do. It was a sound I knew and trusted. I said goodnight to Walter the way I always do when I need to borrow courage. I slid the recorder into my coat pocket for the morning. The next day I walked into Jacqueline's office with my folder against my chest. Her receptionist offered coffee. I asked for water because my voice needed something clear. Jacqueline came out to greet me herself. She is a woman who moves like she does not waste a step. We sat at a table rather than across a desk. She asked me to start where I wanted to start. I told her about the airport and the voices and the words that cut. I handed her the first recording and watched her face while she listened. The only thing that moved was her pen. When the audio ended she said we will fix this in a way that holds. She did not say we will win. She said we will make it hold. She drew a small map on a legal pad. On one side she wrote the word evidence. On the other side she wrote the word protection. Under evidence she listed recordings, bank attempt logs, pre-admission materials if any, will annotations in Walter's hand, neighbor statements if needed. Under protection she wrote affidavit of capacity, revocation of any prior power of attorney, updated will and executor, notice to any facility that no placement is authorized, security steps at home. She told me we would move quietly and lawfully. She told me the first things we file would be time-stamped and notarized. She asked if I had someone who could help me scan and index. I told her about my archivist habits. She smiled and said then we will be fine. When I left her office I felt taller by an inch. On the sidewalk I met a young woman carrying a stack of folders and a laptop bag. She dropped a pen and I picked it up for her. She introduced herself as Sydney, a graduate student in archival science who sometimes worked with Jacqueline on document projects. Her voice had the calm of someone who likes to finish things. We spoke for 2 minutes and in that time I knew I could trust her with a scanner and a box of family photos. Jacqueline stepped out and said if you agree Sydney can help you set up a clean digital trail. I said yes. I walked home under a sky that looked made of soft metal. The porch swing did not creak. The tulips in the vase had lifted their faces toward the window. I set my folder on the table and opened my notebook again. I wrote a new line. I will not be moved without my word. Then I wrote a second line because I wanted to say it twice. I will not be moved without my word. Night fell and with it came a strange peace. Not happiness. Not relief. Something like holding the rail in a storm and knowing your grip is good. I washed my face and set out clothes for the morning. I placed the recorder on my nightstand and rested my hand on it for a moment until I could feel its small weight. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark. The house breathed. So did I. I whispered a question to the room, and to anyone listening through the small window of a screen. Have you ever been forced to hear what you were not meant to hear? If you have, you are not alone. I am right here with you. The next morning the world felt sharper. The sky a colder blue. The air carrying that metallic scent that comes right before something breaks. I made tea and drank it standing up. I didn't need sweetness. I needed focus. The folder from Jacqueline's office sat on the table like a new pulse in the room. I opened it and reread her notes. Evidence. Protection. I copied the list into my own notebook because writing something down makes it real. Under the word evidence I drew 3 small boxes and wrote recordings, documents, witnesses. I left space under each because I knew there would be more. At 9 o'clock Sydney arrived, a small duffel over her shoulder and a laptop hugged to her chest. She smiled in that way young people do when they still believe problems have edges. I'm here to help set up your archive, Ms. Ingram, she said. We cleared the dining table and turned it into a command center. She unpacked a scanner, extension cords, and a flash drive with labels already printed. I showed her the blue tin box, the folders, and the small recorder. She nodded with professional calm, as if this were a project, not a life. We scanned Walter's annotated will first. She adjusted the brightness and resolution until every mark of his pen showed clean. Then we scanned the affidavit from Dr. Clifton, the bank logs from Sharon, and my handwritten notes from the bakery, the library, the church. Each file saved with a timestamp, each labeled in clear language. When we finished the first batch, she said softly, "This is beautiful organization, Ms. Ingram. Most clients come with chaos. You come with order." I smiled, a small thing, but it reached my eyes. Order keeps me steady. She nodded. My grandmother says the same. That afternoon we created an encrypted folder in cloud storage and named it Legal_Bernice. Sydney showed me how to back it up on an external drive and how to hide copies in plain sight. One flash drive went into the sugar canister in the kitchen. The second into a small wooden box labeled sewing kit. The third she sealed in an envelope and wrote on it Ballantyne and Codell, backup A. When she left, I felt lighter but not free. Freedom needs truth, and I still had questions that sat heavy in my gut. At dusk I walked to the end of the street where the light from Ms. Joyce's porch always spills across the sidewalk. She was shelling peas when I arrived. She waved me up the steps. You ever see Monique talking to anyone around here lately? I asked. Joyce tilted her head. A few times. That tall man in a gray car, the one who wears a badge clip on his belt. Looks like office work. Why? I explained enough for her to understand but not enough to make her pity me. She listened and then said, "If you need eyes, we got you. Folks been watching our own since long before cameras." I thanked her and walked home with her promise sitting warm in my pocket. That night I set another recorder by the porch swing, hidden under the cushion. The device was so small it looked like a button. I tested it with a whisper. Testing. Testing. This is my house. The sound played back clear. I turned it off and waited for morning. Cedric arrived around 10, just as he had promised on the phone. His voice over the line had been polite, cautious. "Just dropping by, Mom. We can go over your insurance papers together." I let him in and offered tea. He declined and began pacing. His eyes scanned the countertop, the mail pile, the grocery list by the fridge. He asked if I had opened the envelope from the insurance company yet. I said not yet. He picked it up and slid a finger under the flap. "I can help you with this," he said. "I'd rather read it myself first," I answered. He hesitated, then smiled too wide. "Of course." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a glossy brochure. I recognized the courtyard picture Monique had sent. Golden Oaks. He set it on the table and spoke in his practiced calm. "They're doing open tours Thursday. Music, food, all that. Just come see. You'd like it." I nodded slowly. "Maybe." He leaned closer. "Mom, you've worked so hard your whole life. You deserve rest." I kept my face soft, my eyes on the steam of the kettle. "Rest can wait until I finish what I started." He looked confused. "What's that?" "Making sure everything's in order." He left not long after, promising to call. The moment his car pulled away, I turned off the recorder and labeled the file porch visit to. I listened to a few seconds and heard his tone clear as glass. He sounded caring to anyone else. To me it was rehearsed. That evening I called Jacqueline and described the visit. She told me to keep logging every contact. We'll need a pattern, she said. Manipulation works through repetition. Document each moment it appears as kindness. Her words sat in me like iron. 2 days later I received an envelope with no return address. Inside were photocopies of forms marked draft, guardianship petition, capacity review, facility placement request. The applicant's signature line was blank, but Cedric's name appeared in the contact field. At the bottom was a line that said proposed representative Monique Ingram. My breath caught. It wasn't legal yet, but it was close. I placed the documents under the scanner and saved them as draft petition folder. Then I called Jacqueline. She asked me to bring everything in person. I drove to her office under a gray sky. When I handed her the papers, she studied them for a long time. Where did this come from? Mailbox. No postmark. She tapped the corner of the page with her pen. Then someone inside their circle wants you warned. Why would they? Conscience, she said. Or fear. She photocopied the forms, notarized the copies, and told me to store the originals somewhere safe. I put them in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet under old tax records. She looked up from her notes. We move now. You'll sign a formal revocation of any prior power of attorney. We'll record it at the courthouse tomorrow. We'll notify Dr. Clifton and the bank so no one can claim confusion. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table and read Walter's letter again. The edges had begun to yellow. I traced the line that said, "This is your ground. Stand here." I whispered, "I'm standing, Walter." At dawn I showered, dressed, and pinned my hair neatly. At the courthouse, Jacqueline guided me through each signature. The clerk stamped every page with a date and seal. The sound of the stamp hitting paper felt like thunder. Outside the courthouse, I saw a familiar figure across the street, Velma, Monique's mother. She wore a bright red coat and carried a leather folder. She pretended not to see me, but her face flickered. I stood still and let her pass. Back home, Sydney helped me scan the stamp pages. She smiled when she saw the seal. "First brick in the wall," she said. We printed copies and labeled them revocation for official. I slid one copy into the sugar canister, another into my purse. At noon I received a call from Sharon at the bank. "Mrs. Ingram, just so you know, your son called asking if you plan to make any updates after the holidays. I told him policy prevents us from discussing your account, but I thought you should be aware." I thanked her, my voice steady but low. After the call I sat by the window and looked at the tulips. They were starting to curl at the edges, petals drying but still golden. Strength isn't always pretty. That evening Miss Joyce called. "You might want to know, baby. That man with the batch clip came around again. Took pictures of your house. Earl saw him. Earl's got one of those new phones and snapped a shot back. Can you send it?" I asked. A minute later my phone buzzed with the image. A man in a gray sedan, head turned away but the license plate clear. I printed the picture and slid it into my folder under witness_reports. The next morning I took the photo to Jacqueline. She raised her eyebrows. "That's an investigator from Herbert and Ida Law Group," she said. "Velma's people. We'll file a notice of trespass with the city, quiet but official." She drafted the letter, dated it, and sent it by courier. Everything with her was quiet but official. By the end of the week my archive had grown. 3 recordings, 2 affidavits, bank logs, petition drafts, witness photo. I laid them all out on the table one night and realized that the story now had weight. It could be seen and touched, could not be erased. Then came the letter that broke what was left of my heart. It arrived folded inside an envelope from a local law office. Inside was a printed copy of a text exchange between Cedric and someone named Ashby. The messages read, "Ashby, the file will go through once the affidavit is filed. Cedric, she's slipping already. The staff will support it. Ashby, remember the affidavit needs witnesses who see confusion. Cedric, working on it." I read those lines 3 times. They had been discussing me as if I were paperwork. I took the letter to Jacqueline immediately. She scanned it, annotated it, and placed it in a plastic sleeve. "This is attempted fraud," she said. "We can't call it criminal yet, but it's misconduct at minimum." She leaned back and sighed. You know, Mrs. Ingram, you're not the only one. I've seen this play before. Children positioning for inheritance under the flag of concern. I nodded but said nothing. Words were thin. That night I played the recordings again, one after another, in order. The first time I heard the malice I couldn't face. The second time I heard the structure, the way they built their argument piece by piece. By the third playback I was calm. I noted timestamps, transcribed key phrases, and highlighted patterns of manipulation. I saved the transcript under recordings under transcribed for one. I printed a copy for Jacqueline and another for myself. I placed a post-it on the top page. Evidence, not emotion. 2 days later the post office delivered another envelope. This one from Golden Oaks itself. Inside was a packet labeled pre-admission inquiry. It listed my name, date of birth, and medical provider. The handwriting in the referral field was unmistakably Monique's. I drove to the facility that afternoon. The lobby smelled like lemon polish and artificial flowers. The receptionist smiled too wide. Welcome, Mrs. Ingram. You're here for your orientation. I smiled back just as wide. I'm here to confirm something. A manager appeared, a man in a beige suit. We're so glad you decided to visit early, he said. I handed him the packet. I never applied for this. Can you tell me who did? He looked nervous. It was listed as a family referral. Is it binding? He shook his head. No, ma'am. Pre-admission only. Nothing moves forward without consent or a valid power of attorney. Good, I said. Because that was revoked 3 days ago. He blinked. I'll make a note. Please do. And print me a copy. When I left, I saw the reflection of my face in the glass door. The woman looking back wasn't frightened. She was documenting. I scanned the new papers that evening. Sydney labeled the file facility and revoked. She smiled when she saw my expression. That look, she said. That's the one people get when they know they're winning, even if it's not over yet. By Friday Jacqueline had assembled a complete binder. She called it the timeline of control. Each tab told a chapter. Initial manipulation, evidence collection, legal action, facility intervention, witness support. She placed sticky notes on pages that needed my signature. We'll deliver copies to the county office and the Bar Association oversight, she explained. No public scandal unless they force it. But this will stay on record. She handed me a clean envelope at the end. Inside is a copy of every form. Keep it somewhere safe but not hidden. Truth shouldn't have to hide. When I got home, I slid the envelope behind Walter's framed photo on the mantel. His eyes in that picture always seemed to say, "Go on, B. You know what to do." That night, for the first time in weeks, I ate dinner at the table instead of standing. I made cornbread again and poured cider into a glass. I wrote in my journal, "Truth builds slow but it builds." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and somewhere far down the street a porch light flickered. I closed my eyes and listened. The silence no longer scared me. It was the sound of evidence being born. I woke with a plan and a stillness that surprised me. The quiet did not feel empty anymore. It felt like a room I had cleaned for a purpose. I brewed tea and laid the binder on the table. I traced the tabs with my fingertip. Initial manipulation, evidence collection, legal action, facility intervention, witness support. It looked like a ladder. I was going to climb it. First I called Ms. Joyce. I asked if she and Mr. Earl could stop by Wednesday evening. I told her I would make gumbo and cornbread. She heard everything behind my words. She said, "We will be there." I sent a short message to Pastor Lawrence and asked if he might drop in for a blessing over dinner. He sent back a single sentence. "Truth is worth blessing." By noon I texted Cedric. "Gumbo night Wednesday. Come hungry. Bring Monique." He answered within minutes. We would not miss it. He added a smile that felt like a sales flyer. Monique sent a tulip emoji. I placed my phone face down and breathed. Sydney arrived that afternoon and we did a final sweep of the house. She placed a small recorder under the dining room sideboard behind the linen cloth. She set another on top of the tall bookcase tucked behind family photos. We tested each with a few words and listened back. The sound was crisp. She showed me the timestamps and the file names. Dining 1. Room mic 2. Porch 3. She stood in the doorway and looked at me for a long moment. You do not have to perform, she said. You only have to be yourself. I nodded. Myself would be enough. On Wednesday I chopped onions and celery and green peppers and let them sweat in the pot. The kitchen filled with a sweetness that calmed my hands. I browned the sausage. I added stock. I stirred with slow circles until the gumbo sighed. I set bowls and folded napkins. I placed the green vase with yellow tulips at the center of the table. I took Walter's photo from the mantel and set it on the sideboard where the recorder hid. I told him quietly that I was ready. The doorbell rang. Cedric stood on the porch with Monique. They looked polished and relaxed, as if this were any other midweek dinner. I hugged my son. I allowed my cheek to brush the air beside Monique's cheek. Her perfume was the same floral note that had haunted my hallway. She glanced around the room like a cat in a new house. Ms. Joyce and Mr. Earl arrived a few minutes later with a peach cobbler wrapped in a towel. They carried the warmth between them like a blessing. Pastor Lawrence came last, smiling, hands folded as if he had just come from prayer. He asked if we minded a short word before we ate. Cedric said of course with a respectful tilt of his head. We formed a loose circle near the table. The pastor thanked the Lord for food and fellowship and the courage to call things by their names. He did not linger. He said amen. We echoed it and took our seats. I ladled gumbo. We passed cornbread and butter. We spoke about the choir program and the weather and the football game. Cedric relaxed by inches. He complimented the seasoning like a man who wants a door to stay open. Monique made small talk about a new yoga studio. Ms. Joyce asked polite questions and listened like a witness. Mr. Earl told a joke about the barber shop. The room hummed. Halfway through the meal Monique placed a brochure on the table. Golden Oaks. A courtyard with raised beds and a guitarist smiling into the sun. There is a community night on Thursday, she said. Could be fun to visit. Music therapy. Walking path. She put a gentle brightness in her voice. Cedric nodded. It might give you a sense of ease, he said. Just a tour. I lifted my spoon and let the quiet build for a heartbeat. Then I asked a single question. If I were to go, who would hold my keys while I was gone? Monique smiled. We can manage that for you, she said. It would be temporary. Just to reduce stress. We would handle the heavy things so you can rest. The air shifted. Ms. Joyce looked down at her plate. Mr. Earl sipped water. Pastor Lawrence cleared his throat but said nothing. I nodded as if the idea were interesting. That is kind, I said. I looked at the tulips. I looked at my son. I thought about the first time he walked across a stage in cap and gown. I wondered where that boy had gone. We finished the meal and moved to the living room for cobbler and tea. Cedric stood near the window and paced in 3 small lines the way he does when he is preparing a pitch. Monique sat on the edge of the sofa and spoke about the cost savings of consolidating services. She used phrases like comprehensive care and streamlined decision-making. I let her talk. The recorders listened for me. When they left, there were hugs and thank yous and we will talk tomorrow. I closed the door and locked it. I did not exhale until the engine of their car faded. We gathered by the table. Pastor Lawrence placed a hand on my shoulder and said a final prayer, short and steady. Ms. Joyce squeezed my hand. Mr. Earl said the gumbo was perfect, which is how men say I am proud of you when the room is tender. After they left, Sydney and I collected the devices. We set them on the table and watched progress bars move across the laptop screen. Then we listened. The conversation unspooled with a clarity that made my skin pebble. Keys. Temporary. Ease. Manage. Every word sat on the audio like a stone. Sydney made a copy of each file. She stored them on the drive labeled Dining 1 and Room 2. She wrote the date in neat numbers. We slept hard that night. Morning arrived like a clean page. Jacqueline called at 9. Bring the recordings, she said. We are delivering the first packet to Herbert and Ida this afternoon. At the office she arranged everything into a tight stack. On top sat my formal revocation of power of attorney, stamped by the court. Beneath that a cover letter describing any attempt at guardianship as improper in light of the medical affidavit and my expressed wishes. Then a table of contents. Then the transcripts with timestamps. Then the pre-admission inquiry with the notation that consent is required and not provided. Then the witness list. Then the trespass notice for the gray sedan man who had photographed my house. It was a shield and a mirror. It would deflect and it would reflect. A courier could carry it, I said. Jacqueline shook her head. Not today. Today we looked them in the eye. We drove together. The office of Herbert and Ida sat on the second floor above a dental practice. The waiting room smelled like mint and paper. A receptionist with pale lipstick asked if she could help us. Jacqueline placed the packet on the counter and asked for Mr. Ashby by name. He was an associate there. The receptionist said he was in a meeting. Jacqueline asked her to place the packet directly in his hands. We stepped out to the sidewalk and did not speak until we reached the corner. Jacqueline finally said the next move is theirs. Then she looked at me and added, but we already won the part that matters. That evening I stood in the doorway and watched the sky turn the color of pewter. A knock at the door startled me. It was a courier with a thin envelope. Inside was a short note on firm letterhead. I have reviewed the materials you provided. I will no longer participate in any matter concerning your estate. Please find enclosed a printout of filings and drafts over the past 6 months for your records. Signed Ashby. I sat down before my knees could wobble. The printout listed dates and subject lines and message fragments. Draft petition. Witness affidavits template. Pre-admission inquiry. There were sentences that mirrored things said over soup at my kitchen table. There was a line that read neighbor observation of confusion to be obtained. They had a plan. Now I had their plan. The twist hit like a bell. Someone on their side had handed me the light. I called Jacqueline. She listened as I read the note aloud. Her voice was calm when she spoke. This is a retraction and a breadcrumb trail. We will secure it. We will log it. We will prepare a statement of intent to be filed if any further attempt is made. I placed the printout in a plastic sleeve. I wrote a note on a sticky to place on the front. Their plan. My proof. Sydney arrived with her duffel and scanned the entire packet. She added the files to the cloud folder and to both backup drives. She labeled the new folder retraction and trail. She sat back in her chair and looked at me. You are not only safe, she said. You are visible. That matters. The next morning Cedric called. His voice carried a different weight. He said, Mom, I think we should slow down and talk. I said yes. He said, can we come by? I said this afternoon. I set the house the way I wanted it. Clean but not staged. Walter's photo on the sideboard. The tulips still bright. The binder in plain sight on the dining table. I slipped a small recorder under a folded napkin. I pressed my palms against the table to feel the grain of the wood. Then I stood by the window and waited. Cedric arrived with a folder under his arm. Monique followed 2 steps behind. They did not sit. Cedric began to speak with the old smoothness. He said Ashby had stepped back and that the situation was unclear. He said there had been misunderstandings, and that a family plan would be better than outside involvement. I listened. I walked to the drawer and pulled out a neat stack of papers. I set them on the table one by one. Revocation of power of attorney. Affidavit of capacity. Pre-admission inquiry marked not authorized. The transcript with timestamps. The retraction note. I did not raise my voice. I did not change my posture. I told him what I had done. I told him everything was signed and recorded. I told him I would manage my affairs. I told him that pretending otherwise would not change the facts. His jaw shifted. His eyes moved to the hallway as if he expected help to walk in. Monique crossed her arms and lifted her chin. We were trying to help, she said. I did not argue. I pressed play on the recorder and let the room fill with their earlier words. The careful promises. The talk of keys. The phrase reduce stress. The line from the hallway call about moving me by Monday. The sound of it scraped the varnish from pretense. Monique flushed. Cedric stared at the binder. For a second I saw the boy he had been. The boy who asked what integrity meant. I felt grief pass through me like a shadow. Then it left. Not all silence is weakness, I said. No one moved. The house held its breath. The tulips did not blink. Cedric gathered the papers and then set them back down without folding them. He said nothing. He walked to the door and paused. He said, I will call you. He left. Monique followed without a word. I stood at the table and listened to the absence. I turned off the recorder and named the file Quiet Confrontation. I placed it in a sleeve and slid it into the binder. That night Sydney and I reviewed the audio and checked every timestamp. We printed a copy for Jacqueline. We printed another for my file behind Walter's photo. The house felt different. It had less shadow. In the morning, a letter arrived from the facility. It acknowledged receipt of my notice and confirmed that no action would be taken without my consent. It stated that the inquiry initiated by family had been closed. I placed the letter under the tab titled Facility Intervention. I wrote thank you next to the entry in my notebook. I allowed myself 1 minute to cry in the kitchen where no one could mistake the reason. By afternoon, Jacqueline had drafted a short statement of intent. It said that any further attempt to secure guardianship or control my estate without cause would be considered legal overreach and elder coercion, and would be reported to the appropriate authorities. It was not a threat. It was a line drawn in ink. We sent copies to the bank, to the clinic, and to Herbert and Ida. We dated each. We logged each. The act of logging felt like building a fence that no one could pretend not to see. That evening I sat on the porch and watched the last light settle on the street. Children rode bikes. A neighbor called to a dog. Somewhere a radio played a slow song. I held my cup and felt the warmth move into my hands. I thought about revenge. It had a bitter shine to it. I did not want that taste in my mouth. I wanted something cleaner. I wanted consequence and clarity. I wanted public light where schemes go to burn out. The trap was set. The documents were in place. Their ally had stepped away and left a trail behind him. My son had heard his own voice in the air of the room he grew up in. I had not raised my tone. I had raised my proof. I stood and went inside and turned off the porch light. The house did not feel like a battlefield. Felt like a record. The record was complete. The week after the confrontation unfolded with an almost eerie calm. No calls. No unannounced visits. The mailbox filled only with flyers and bills. But quiet has its own language, and this one said they are regrouping. I woke early each day, brewed coffee, and opened the curtains wide. I refused to shrink back into corners. The air outside held that thin promise of spring. The tulips in the vase were fading now, their petals soft as old paper, but they still caught the light. On Tuesday morning, Jacqueline called. "The time has come," she said. "For what?" "To take this beyond our folders." I knew what she meant. It was time for visibility. She had arranged for a community presentation at the local church hall, part of a series called Know Your Power, Elder Rights and Legal Safety. The title itself felt like a song written for women like me. The event was open to the public, neighbors, church members, bank officers, and even the local press. It was not a spectacle. It was a lesson disguised as conversation. Jacqueline told me I wouldn't be alone. Sydney would help with the visuals. Pastor Lawrence would open the event with a prayer. Ms. Joyce and Mr. Earl would sit in the front row. She said, "You'll tell your story without names. The facts will speak for themselves." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the house breathe. I imagined faces, other mothers, other widows, sitting in folding chairs, nodding when they recognized their own silence inside my story. The hall smelled of polish and coffee when I arrived. Folding chairs filled the space, and a long table held pamphlets from elder law offices, brochures about power of attorney, and cards for financial literacy workshops. Sydney was already there setting up a small projector. On the screen glowed a single line in white letters. "Not all silence is weakness." I took a slow breath. Pastor Lawrence stood beside me, his hand warm on my shoulder. "The truth doesn't need a stage," he said. "Just a steady voice." The room filled gradually. I recognized neighbors, choir members, even Sharon from the bank. At the back I saw a familiar face, Velma, Monique's mother, standing near the exit. She wasn't hiding. Her posture was stiff, her eyes restless. Jacqueline began. She thanked the church for hosting and spoke about the importance of documentation. "Injustice loves confusion," she said. "Clarity is how we fight back." Then she introduced me simply as Bernice, a retired archivist, a widow, and a woman who learned how to protect what she built. I walked to the microphone and looked at the rows of faces. The hum of the air conditioner filled the space. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I almost left town for the holidays," I began. I had a ticket in my hand, a suitcase packed, and a reason to breathe somewhere else. Then I forgot my passport. And because of that small mistake, I came home early enough to hear my own son planning to take my life away from me, quietly, legally, and with a smile. Gasps moved through the room. I told them about the voices I heard through the study door. The words guardianship, diminished capacity, placement. I described the cold in my chest, the drive to the bakery, the smell of cinnamon and almonds that brought me back to myself. I told them how Walter's notes in the will reminded me that control was not something you gift away. It's something you defend with knowledge. As I spoke, Sydney advanced slides behind me. Images of documents appeared. A will annotated in handwriting, a doctor's affidavit with clean signatures, a bank log noting attempted access, a timeline labeled pattern of concern. I told them how I recorded the conversations, how I did it legally, how each polite sentence turned into evidence. I told them about the retraction letter from the lawyer who had been part of the scheme, and how truth sometimes arrives through the cracks left by guilt. I did not name Cedric or Monique. I didn't have to. The story was larger than us. The people who love you can still betray you, I said. Not out of hatred, but out of hunger. Hunger for control, hunger for comfort, hunger for your silence. But if you know how to write things down, to keep receipts, to ask for signatures and dates, you can turn that silence into armor. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the projector. Then someone clapped, Ms. Joyce. Others followed. It wasn't loud applause. It was steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a congregation. Pastor Lawrence stepped up beside me. This, he said, is what justice looks like before the courtroom. This is prevention. This is community. I stepped back, trembling with something deeper than pride. Relief, maybe. The kind that lives inside truth finally spoken aloud. Jacqueline closed the event with a short statement. We will be publishing a guide next month with steps and templates for any elder who fears coercion. Thanks to Mrs. Ingram, we know what works. People came up afterward to shake my hand. Some hugged me. Others whispered stories of their own. A nephew changing account passwords. A daughter-in-law filing helpful forms. A son insisting on joint accounts. Each confession was a small fire. Together they could light a whole field. Velma stayed near the door until the crowd thinned. When she approached, her eyes looked tired. I didn't know how far they took it, she said softly. I believe you, I said. She nodded, pulled a small envelope from her purse, and pressed it into my hand. You'll want to read this, she said. Then she walked out. Inside was a single page, handwritten. It was from Monique. I was wrong. I can't undo what we started, but I can stop it from going further. Please protect yourself. Tell Cedric I'll be leaving. I folded the paper carefully and slid it into my folder. 2 days later, the local newspaper published a small article about the event. The headline read, Community Forum shines light on elder rights and guardianship abuse. The photo showed me standing behind the lectern, hand on a stack of papers, light falling across my shoulder like a quiet crown. That same afternoon, Sharon called. You've started something, Mrs. Ingram, she said. We've had 3 clients come in this morning asking about power of attorney reviews. They all mentioned your talk. At the library where I once worked, they placed a copy of the article on the bulletin board near the entrance. Someone had underlined the line, not all silence is weakness. Sydney came by that evening with a new folder labeled press. She tucked the article inside. You turned your story into policy, she said. I just told the truth, I replied. Most people never get that far, she said. We shared tea on the porch. The night air smelled of rain. I could hear the faint sound of gospel music from a neighbor's house. Felt like a benediction. 3 days later, Cedric appeared at the gate. He didn't come to the door. He stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I walked out slowly and stopped a few feet away. I read the article, he said. People are calling me. I didn't think it would get this far. It went exactly as far as it needed to, I said. He looked down. I didn't mean to hurt you. I believe that, I said. But you still did. He nodded. What happens now? You live with the truth. So do I. Maybe someday we can speak like family again. But not today. He swallowed and looked past me at the house. It looks smaller, he said. It's the same size. You're just standing on the other side of the fence. He nodded once and left. The gate clicked shut behind him. Inside, I sat at the table and opened my journal. I wrote, Public light heals what secrecy rots. Then I closed the book and placed it beside Walter's photo. The following Sunday, during service, Pastor Lawrence mentioned the forum. He didn't use my name, but everyone knew. He spoke about stewardship, not of money, but of one's story. He said, "When one woman chooses truth, 10 others find their voice." After service, a line of women waited to speak with me. Some wanted advice. Some wanted hugs. One older man said quietly, "You saved my sister." I walked home through streets lined with magnolia trees. The world looked unchanged, yet everything felt new. I had not only survived, I had set a precedent. That evening, Sydney and I met at the community center to organize the materials into a workshop guide. We named it the Ingram Protocol. Quiet Defenses for Loud Injustices. The title made us laugh, but it fit. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the first draft was ready. Step by step, it showed how to gather evidence, revoke authority, secure witnesses, and reclaim dignity. Each page began with a quote from my notes. The last page carried the line Walter had written years ago. "This is your ground. Stand here." Sydney looked at the words and said, "He would be proud." "I think he already knows," I said. We printed one copy and placed it in a binder. On the spine she wrote in clean letters, "Community Edition 1." When she left, I sat alone for a while, listening to the crickets outside. Then I whispered a final line into the quiet house. Not all silence is weakness. Some of it is waiting for the right moment to speak. The house answered with its familiar creak, the sound of old wood settling. I smiled. Tomorrow would bring new questions, maybe even new battles, but I was ready. The truth was out, and I was standing exactly where Walter had told me to stand. Morning brought the kind of quiet that does not ask for permission. I opened the curtains and let the light walk across the floorboards. The tulips were finished. I carried them to the sink and thanked them for standing bright when I needed a reminder that life still chooses color. I set the empty vase back on the table. Space can be holy too. Jacqueline called first. She had filed the statement of intent with the clerk and confirmed receipt with the bank and the clinic. Her voice was calm. "You are covered," she said. "Document any contact and keep living your life." Living your life sounded like a verdict and a blessing. I made a pot of gumbo for the freezer because future me would be grateful. I labeled the container in neat script the way I label everything. Order will always be a kind of kindness. In the afternoon I sat with my journal and faced the grief that had been pacing in the hallway. I wrote the names of the people I loved. Walter. Cedric. The woman I once hoped Monique could become. I let the pen rest. I whispered for strength to separate love from permission. I felt the ache rise like a tide and I let it move through me. There are some losses that do not need words. They need breath. I kept breathing. 2 days later Cedric called again. He asked to meet on the porch. I agreed. He stood with his hands open, a gesture that used to work on me when he was a boy with a scraped knee. He said I did wrong. I believed him. He said he wanted to fix it. I told him the only repair that could matter would be a life where my boundaries were not treated like suggestions. He said he would try. I told him trying is not a promise. Silence held the space between us. Monique did not come. A week later Velma left a message that her daughter had moved to an apartment across town. No details. Only a brief apology for the part she played. I saved the voicemail and then I let it go. Forgiveness is not a door you can kick open. It is a hinge that moves when the weight is right. The workshop guide that Sydney and I built turned into a standing class at the community center. We named the program the Ingram Protocol because the volunteers insisted and I laughed because it sounded bigger than me. On Tuesday evenings the room filled with aunties and grandfathers and neighbors who carried folders stuffed with letters and bills and old insurance cards. I showed them how to make a timeline, how to ask a bank officer the right questions, how to request an affidavit without apology. Sydney set up a scanning station by the coffee urn. We printed a checklist that started with this line: "Truth keeps receipts." Sharon from the bank came one night to answer questions. She showed a sample of an appointment log and explained what can and cannot be changed without consent. Pastor Lawrence opened the session with a short prayer and closed it by reminding everyone that a boundary is a blessing you give to your future self. People wiped their eyes and then they stood straighter. It was a good kind of standing. Stephanie from the paper returned to do a follow-up. She photographed a spread of labeled folders and a row of hands holding pens above signatures. The next morning, a small headline read, "Community builds quiet defenses." In the first paragraph, she wrote that sometimes power returns not with a shout but with a date stamp. I cut out the piece and slid it into the press folder. The spine of the binder looked heavier that day. One afternoon, I walked past the mirror and paused. The woman looking back at me had the same face she had yesterday. What had changed was inside. The part of me that had been taught to apologize for taking up space was quiet now. In its place was something that did not need permission to speak. It simply did. The phone rang less. The doorbell rang not at all. Peace can arrive like that. Not dramatic. Not loud. It sits down at your table and waits for you to notice. I noticed. On a warm Saturday, we hosted an elder rights night at the church. People shared short testimonies. A grandmother described how she revoked a sloppy power of attorney. A widower explained how he added a trusted friend as a second set of eyes on his mail. I spoke last. I told them that justice had not felt like victory to me. It had felt like coming home to a house that finally remembered my name. After the event, Pastor Lawrence asked if I would consider starting a small fund in Walter's honor for elders who needed help with notarizing and safe storage. We sat in the empty sanctuary and thought in the soft light. Yes, I said. We called it the Walter Ingram Peace Fund. We do not make speeches. We pay for a notary. We buy a fireproof envelope. We put a flash drive into a sugar canister. Quiet things that change everything. When I returned home that evening, the porch swing moved a little in the evening wind. I sat and let the last light touch my hands. I spoke to Walter in my head the way I do when I need to measure my courage. You told me to stand on my own ground. I am standing. Before bed, I opened my journal and wrote the final lines of this chapter. Public light healed what secrecy rotted. Betrayal did not get the last word. Truth did. And so did dignity. Then I turned the page and left it blank. Not because there was nothing to say. Because room for hope needs space. To those of you listening, I will ask the question I ask at the end of every story I tell. Did this help you breathe a little easier? Are you taking care of your papers and your peace? Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me if you found a steady place to stand. I turned off the lamp. The house settled, and so did I. Tomorrow will bring new work. I am ready.